Good afternoon, everybody. We're back for another day of Sichos HaRan. We're up to Sifla Yud Tes, which is part of a series of Sichos, three Sichos really, about the importance of learning Torah. Rabbi Nachman says, "Pamecha l'siparnu imo me'inem adfasas hatzvarm." Rabbi Nachman says that one time we spoke to him, Rabbi Nachman, about the topic of printing svarim. Shabadoris Halalu, Nisrabu Ma'obali Madfisim, that in our days, in their days, right, the late 1700s, there were many, many, many more printers than there used to be. Many more printing presses, many more printers. Behem Madfisim, B'Chopam Svarim Harbe, and each time they run a print run, they print so many copies of the Sefer Ma'od, Mirishonim, V'Achronim. They're printing so many Svarim of Rishonim. They're printing so many Svarim of Achronim. The Kafsu Alehem Zivina Ma'od, and people jump and buy them, and they're bought up. Ki Akol Konim Svarim Asher. Because nowadays, they say this. They're saying this at the end of the late 1700s, early 1800s. Nowadays, everyone is buying Svarim. Svarim are readily available. They're relatively easily printed, and they are affordable, and people are buying them. We were discussing this. They say, Rabbi Nassim says, we were discussing this with Rabbi Nachman. V'amar Rabbeinu Zichrono Livracha. And Rabbi Nachman said about this, he said, Ki Amru Rabbeinu Zichrono Livracha, the rabbi said, Atid the Torah shetishkach miYisrael. The rabbi said that in the future, at some point, Torah will eventually be forgotten from the Jewish people. And therefore, Al-Kain, Madfisim Svarim Harbe, and that's why we print all these Svarim. And everyone buys the Svarim so that everyone will have Svarim. Everyone will have Svarim available to them. So that Torah will not be forgotten, thanks to the fact that Svarim are readily available and everybody has access to Torah. Even in the hands of a tailor, Piyotze. And similarly, right, people who are not wealthy, people who are not particularly learned, whose profession is not Torah study, so that they would need books, but because it's their professional vocation, people are not rabbis, simple people who are just ordinary Jews who want to be connected with Torah. They have svarim, and some Alsha svarim, they have svarim. And not only that, they don't only have svarim, but everyone is running around trying to buy svarim. They're going to svarim stores, they're going to booksellers, and they're buying svarim kadesh svarim biyad kol echad, so that everyone will have kadesh or tu kol haTorah yishkach al yedei zeh, so that Torah can't possibly be forgotten thanks to the proliferation of svarim and the availability and the cheapness of svarim that are readily available all over the place. I think it's fascinating to reflect on this. First of all, I think it's interesting that the Sikha begins with Rabbi Nassim recounting how they're talking about, I guess, sort of contemporary topics, interesting reflections on the state of the world. They're talking about how interesting it is and how, they're noticing the fact that the world is different today than it used to be. There are books now, there are svarim now, there are printers now, and isn't that fascinating? Not every conversation is about Torah. Not every conversation is obviously and directly very, very deep. Of course, comments and reflections on the state of the world and ordinary things like the state of the printing industry turn into important comments and discussions about deeper ideas. But they're talking about the state of the world. They're talking about their observation of the world around them. Maybe sorry, from the world around us. And what we see around us, and the state of the world around us, and developments that are happening, and technological advances, and just the way things work differently, being reflected. Indeed, if I can say so, in the context of Rabbi Nachman, being philosophical about the world around us, right? When we see things around us and we reflect on them, we think about them, we love, like philosophy is really just sort of the problematizing, breaking down, and deconstructing of the things we encounter all the time. What is love? What is politics? What does it mean to be a leader? What is leadership made of? What are the components what is science? philosophizing about this, just reflecting on and deconstructing and trying to think about what these common things that we encounter, what they're made of, what they're about, what their significance is. And they're doing this in sort of about Hasasa Svarim, about the printing of Svarim. And it's important to appreciate also that what they're describing here really is incredibly revolutionary, incredibly revolutionary. To the extent that Svarim exist in the pre-modern world and in the medieval world, of course, they are handwritten. And a handwritten book is cumbersome to produce and requires incredible amounts of skill. And a handwritten book could, cost the equivalent of, a year's salary or something like that, or even a multiple years' salary for really large books. Meaning it's a massive, huge investment. Incredibly wealthy people can afford to throw away a year's salary on something, or can afford to buy things that cost a year's salary that the normal person affords and earns in a year. But how many people have books? There are many letters, there are many chuvas, and there are many letters from the medieval period, from the Rishonim, describing how even great rabbis and Rishonim, great Talmidei Chachamim, rabbis of cities, rabbis of regions, they're familiar with some areas of Torah and they're not familiar with other areas of Torah. They simply don't have access to it. They don't have the books to learn. There's a famous letter to the Rosh about the Mishnah Torah in particular, where there's a conversation that happens about whether the Mishnah Torah is a positive thing or a negative thing, written to him by a rabbi from northern Italy, and whether the Mishnah Torah sort of circumventing the need to delve into the depths of the Gemara to derive the halacha, whether that's a positive or a negative. And one of the things this Italian rabbi says to the Rosh is that, I'm familiar with 3 Siddharim of Shas, but the other 3 I don't know. This is the Rav of a city, or perhaps of an entire region. I only know part of Shas. Why does he only know part of Shas? He only has part of Shas. To get the rest of Shas, you would have to have more books. And books, again, extremely expensive. Who has books? Even once printing began, the early printing for the first couple hundred years of printing, printing is extremely expensive, extremely cumbersome. And buying a book is like buying a new car. Right? I'm going to spend $25,000-$30,000 on a new car. Who can spend that? We all have cars and we all buy new cars, but we can't buy them without thought. We can't buy them, frivolously, most of us, and we can't have too many of them. And books, even with printing, books become expensive. But by the 1700s and the early 1800s, printing and the art of printing and the art of type layout and advances in technology and paper production and binding and typesetting and things like that have gone so far. But now books are readily available and you buy books for affordable prices. They're still relatively much more expensive than they are today, of course, but they're affordable and everyone can have them, like Rabbi Nachman is saying here. And this is really an incredible, remarkable, mind-blowing kind of thing. The writing down of Torah, so that Shalot Tishnach Torah Mitzvah was such a significant event. Chazal decide that they're going to circumvent Eis Lasos L'Hashem Appears for Sefer. We're going to circumvent the prohibition on turning Torah Shebaal Peh into Torah Shebaal Sav, of writing down Torah Shebaal Peh. And we're going to write it down because the only way to preserve it is to turn it into a fixed text. And even though early on, because of the limits of written book production, even the text of the oral Torah, the Mishnah, etc., were still memorized orally, but even fixing them in a text was a way of making them more memorizable and more fixed and more transmittable. And of course, we go from that to writing and printing. And this is all in attempt to try and preserve Torah, so that Torah is not entirely dependent on long-term personal relationships between teachers and students. And in times of crisis, in times of instability, Torah could be forgotten. And in many instances, we know from Tanakh and even from the time from Shas, there were times when it came close to Torah being forgotten and the chain of Torah transmission being disrupted or close to it. And so it's really an incredible and remarkable thing Rabbi Nachman here is reflecting on, and appreciate in the chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that now we find ourselves in a position where Torah will never be forgotten. If Torah was completely and totally forgotten, we could reconstruct it from the books that are available. If every living conduit of Torah, God forbid, were to disappear, and we've had things like that have been close, well known, that Holocaust and certain and other calamities top to the top, that reap massive widespread destruction among the Jewish community will really cause a massive tear in the fabric of Torah. There's streams of Torah that are lost forever, and there are streams of living Torah that disappear because they can't be transmitted from person to person. But to the extent that those things are now written down in books, we have books of Minhagim, we have books of Musar that require dependence on living examples of Musar. So these things can be reconstructed, and that's very, very valuable. But then Rabbi Nachman pivots and emphasizes that the books themselves are not the key. Avol zeh ein yodim. But with all of these books, we don't realize when we don't learn the Torah, when we don't have a living, live, actual engagement with these books, the books are worthless. The books don't help at all. If we don't have a living tradition of being actively engaged in Torah, and active engagement in Torah means a relational engagement in Torah, people learning with each other, people teaching each other, people teaching each other, learning from each other, and so on, then the books don't help. Our many sins, limud haTorah, the actual learning of Torah, has fallen at the very same time as the books have proliferated. The learning has diminished. And nowadays, Rabbi Nachman says the learning has greatly, greatly diminished. How will it help to have lots of books and thereby prevent Torah from being forgotten? If we're not learning the books. And not just that we're not learning the books, because we can read the books. But if we don't have a living tradition, there always has to be a Torah Shabbat Peh accompanying whatever Torah Shabbat Sav we have. And as Torah Shabbat Peh turns into Torah Shabbat Sav, because living traditions of teaching and learning from teachers and students get now written down in books, those books themselves have to become the foundation for further Torah Shabbat Peh that develops out of them. The living tradition is what makes sure that the Torah actually lives and the Torah actually breathes. The written Torah, like Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi intended with the original written Torah of the Mishnah, the original writing of oral Torah, the original writing of Limud Torah that was produced in the Mishnah, it's just an outline. It's a way of facilitating easy recall, of structuring our learning. But the learning itself has to happen beyond the pages of the books, within the deeper than the pages of the books, and outside the pages of the books. Bezras Hashem, we shall be zocha to have many, many, many books. God knows I have some, and I want more. But we should appreciate that big libraries are not the be-all and end-all of Torah. We can have incredible learning with only a few books. And in fact, I find that is often the case. If I travel somewhere and I take, I fill up a carry-on luggage with a few books, and if I'm away for a while, I have, much, much, much fewer books than I would ever have. But the learning is much, much, much better. And I'm forced to sort of go deep into what I have, rather than have access to everything at my fingertips. And so just as we have many, many books and appreciate the value and the benefit to live in a time where it's easy to have such massive libraries of Torah texts, we also have to emphasize and appreciate the importance of actually learning those texts in a way that goes beyond those texts and deeper than those texts, and is live and human. Have a wonderful day.